And the broad trend that we see is that South Africans don't think racism is the major problem. And it's not because other problems are so much worse. They are, but it's not like it's because there has been real progress. It's because really South Africans' daily lived experience, the average daily lived experience, is to not experience any racism at all.
Please go check out rebelstoreza.com. Their winter range is now available. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Real Moments. Real Moments are sections from longer interviews done on my channel that I think you guys might find interesting. Your Real Moment is in. I understand that IR recently did a poll and came up with some interesting information. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. Let me just preface this by saying I actually wrote about who I voted for in 2019, and it was Cope. So
okay, sorry.
don't hate me. Don't hate me even more. Look, we did this polling, and it's so important, man. We've got a campaign around this. So let me really start by saying, check out racism is not the problem.coza.
Yes.
And you'll see this unpack more, and you'll see how if you want to, you can sort of help this mission move along. Our polling is just flabbergasting if you compare what we find when we do a demographically representative sample survey, statistically significant with a confidence interval of like 3%. Of ordinary South Africans, to compare that to what you hear on the daily news. We start by asking people, what's the major problem in the country? What are the two biggest unresolved problems in South Africa since 1994? We do not, we've done in the before with different survey respondents, obviously, we've provided a list and been like, you choose from it. And then people said, no, but you're egging them on by providing the list. So we said, no list. You just tell us what's on your mind in a language of your own choice, face-to-face interviews around the country. And yeah, most people said unemployment. That's no surprise. Most people our age and younger don't have a job.
Yep.
Next most popular one was crime, I think, drug abuse, corruption, housing, service delivery failures, poor education. These are like the major problems people identify. Right down at the bottom of the list, number 15, 3% said racism. So 3% of people sort of volunteer that racism is the problem. 95%, like we've got bigger problems than that. Okay, but hold on. So now the question is it the case that like apartheid, racism was clearly the problem? Now apartheid's over, racism is still terrible. Like white people and black people kind of hate each other. They don't get along, but because unemployment's gotten worse, now that's a bigger problem. Is it the case that our problems we just now have bigger problems? We asked, have you personally experienced any form of racism in the last 5 years? 80% said no.
Sure.
So 16% said yes. And that shows that there is a problem here, right? It's not like racism has gone away. But 80% of people said they haven't experienced any form of racism in the last 5 years. And that number is like, you could do the racial breakdown, white, black, Indian, colored. It's actually almost the highest for black people, like haven't experienced racism in the last 5 years. That is unthinkable when I was born. And it's just a fact today. So usually, I mean, I've been doing a bunch of radio interviews just before the show. I was a bit late because I was on SAFM. A lot of pushback, like polling. How many people are you asking? Like, is this really significant? Okay, we asked 2,500 people. Okay, but there's like 58 million people. Like, is this really for real? Dude, let me just say a couple of things about polling. Firstly, it's got a bad rap from like Brexit because the poll said the Remainers are going to win. And the first 2016 American election, sort of Hillary was going to win. Margin of error is the key thing to note, right? So if the polls say, as they did, that it's going to be 48-49 in Brexit in favor of Remain, that's with the 2% margin of error. So the dummies were like, okay, Remainers are going to win. The smart guys were like, It's too close to call. It's going to be very close. And it was very close. It came out 48-49, just the other way around. And with Trump, Hillary, like, in terms of the actual national vote, the pollsters were pretty much spot on. What they hadn't been thinking, and maybe what her campaign hadn't been thinking, is about how the constituency system means that it's really important to win in some of those Rust Belt states that she didn't even show up to campaign. Okay, don't want to get too much into that, but the point is that the polls were within the confidence interval, within that 2-3% swing either way. And the same for the more recent ones. So polls, if you read 3% as meaning I'll tell you, the actual number is 3.3% of South Africans said that racism is the major problem. Now, if you go around and think that that means that exactly 3.3% of the whole population thinks racism is a major problem, then you just don't know how to read polls. But if you read that as somewhere between kind of 1 and 5%, then you do know how to read polls. And that confidence interval is not arbitrary. It's sort of basic data science. And it's the same way we have unemployment numbers. Stats SA doesn't go and ask everyone, do you have a job or not?
While I have you here, why don't you please go down in the description below and check out Support My Channel, where you can support me for as little as 40 Rand a month. And also you get some perks, but you got to use the Cricut link to get access to these perks. Again, links in the description below. And don't forget, subscribing is always free. Yeah.
And yet they do a demographically, they do a statistical poll every quarter, and they figure out what unemployment looks like, and then they release those data, and everyone's like, oh, well, unemployment's gone up by 2%, or unemployment's gone down by 1%. It's actually a little bit silly to say it's gone up by 2%, because it's 2% with a confidence interval.
Yeah.
It's 1.3 million more unemployed on Stats SA's data since this time last year. There are independent data analysts that find the numbers higher. Some estimate 2 million, some estimate 2.5 million. The reason there's some disagreement about that is because, in part, polling has been difficult in some of the quarters around hard lockdown. But in general, the point is that polls are very poor at indicating precise numbers. They are very good at indicating broad trends. And the broad trend that we see is that South Africans don't think racism is the major problem. And it's not because other problems are so much worse. They are, but it's not like it's because there has been real progress. It's because really South Africans' daily lived experience, the average daily lived experience, is to not experience any racism at all. Remember, if 16% say they've experienced some racism in the last 5 years, an even smaller percentage of that have experienced it in the last week. So this is the good news. I'll say one more question that we asked, because the good news just doesn't seem to fly in the mainstream, right? The mainstream today, there's a school that's racist in Mpumalanga. And Satu's head of Mpumalanga has said, I can tell you why the school is racist. Because I saw a video from 2 years ago where the headmistress said, it's a privilege to be at the school. How can you say that it's a privilege to be at the school? That is racist. So that's the kind of evidence of racism. Now, the incident in question was like a black student and a white student were in a fight.
Yeah.
I don't know about where you were at school, but where I was at school, there were a couple of fights, and sometimes with cross-racial lines, sometimes within racial lines. I literally can't remember any of the fights within the school being about racism. They were usually about girls, sometimes about money.
Lunch boxes or lunch, your lunch.
Well, the default position to be like two kids are fighting, that must be racism, is absurd. It's just as absurd as supposing that the school is racist because the headmistress says it's a privilege to be there. But the thing is being sold as a racist incident, and what that does is it does encourage the 15%, black and white, who then come out and have a bit of a fight with each other of parents or adults that come around. So by inventing a race, by faking racism, you can fake it till you make it with racism. If you really want to, apartheid proved that, by the way. If you look at the former president of the Institute of Race Relations, Herman Giliomeo, great South African historian, he doesn't have polling, but he has I've just finished a book of his where one of the basic arguments that he makes is that apartheid was not nearly as popular as a more non-racial reform attitude would have been in 1948. That's not to say it didn't have a lot of proponents, but South Africans were sort of lured and forced into harder racism. People were getting along much better in the 30s than they were in the 40s, and much better in the 40s than they were in the 50s. And things really got the worst in the 60s and 70s. So politicians, you can't fake racism until you really make it the big problem. And that's one of the things that we want to stop, is say, look, we have most people want to get along, want to be non-racial, want to connect with each other's characters rather than each other's phenotypes.
Yeah.
And we need to own that. We need to spread that good news so that we can defend the common ground against the onslaughts of race hustlers and concoctors, because firstly, they're going to make it worse. And secondly, things as they stand are pretty terrible. And it's only going to be by holding the common ground that we can tackle the big, real issues of the day, starting with unemployment, crime, corruption, and so on. So that's the sort of pitch. And just to check it, we ask people, do you think politicians are talking about racism and colonialism to try and find an excuse for their own failures? Most people say yes.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was your real moment. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please feel free to share it with your friends, family, or whoever you think might find it interesting. Give the video a like. It goes a long way to supporting the channel and helping it grow. And this is your second reminder to please subscribe to my channel. I've got a lot more content coming your way. And please go check out the Telegram channel. It's a channel, not a group. You just get notified of all the upcoming uploads and live streams on this channel. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.